High above the skies of Dreamland, the mirror world needs help. A shadowy figure is unleashing chaos on the peaceful world. Meta Knight flies into the mirror world to protect Dreamland. However... Time for one of Kirby's more out-there adventures. Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. Let's not mess around, let's just get right on into the game. Well, you might notice for once we actually have a multiplayer option. I'll talk more about that as we progress though, because now it's time for the super tutorial area. Now, the most obvious mechanical difference about this game compared to other ones, we have 4 Kirbys. With that said, you're only ever in control of one of them at a time. Which one you're playing as, if you're playing single player, you're always going to be playing Kirby. But if you're playing in multiplayer using the Game Boy Advance's linked cable, and I must you could probably use the wireless adapter that came with Fire Red and Leaf Green, I'm not actually sure about that, you'd be playing as one of the other ones. Whether or not you're in co-op, though, the Kirby's main purpose is to work together to solve puzzles like very low-timed puzzles. Inhaling giant blocks, you can now hold the B button to do a much harder inhalation to inhale bigger blocks or move them away from wherever they're blocking. Or, in other cases, do dumb stuff, like help with boss fights. What I just did there is a mix. I'll be talking about those in a few minutes. Just know that I'm only getting wheel here because I practiced for a while to mimic my friend Kenny. And here's a chest. That's a map. We'll talk more about why this game has maps in a few minutes. The other important thing to note is Kirby's cell phone, but we'll go over that in a second. So meet the crux of the game's plot. The other Meta Knight got thrown in there, and we need to rescue him. And we need to find the, I think, 8 mirror shards located throughout the world, and then go through the mirror, plain and simple. Now, the cell phone that Kirby has is how you contact your co-op buddies or the AI partners. You can either press, I believe, L to call all of them to you. If they're playing a co-op, the person can respond to your call. Or you can press the R button to just return to the room we were just in. Again, I'll talk more about why those are important things and why people might be in different places in a few moments when it becomes more prevalent. Because the start of the game is pretty straightforward. You got a lot of the same enemies from earlier Kirby games. We got all the fire guys, we got the swords and all that. With that said, this game mechanically, I believe, works a bit similarly to Superstar in that some abilities have more than one purpose. It's just that, more often than not, it's closer to, say, how Nightmare in Dreamland or Adventure works, where, by and large, things only really have the one attack. Oh, hi, Shadow Kirby. Bye, Shadow Kirby. He's a semi-recurrent, quote-unquote, boss fight. You hit him and he might drop 1-ups, health items, invincibility candies, things of that nature. But now the background shifting a little bit. Welcome to Level 2 Moonlit Mansion. I guess Moonlight Mansion. And here we have another map. If we press the start button to access the menu, then select, this game's structure becomes much more apparent. This isn't a linear Kirby platformer, it's a Metroid. It is a non-linear adventure where your goal is to explore all over the map, find the 8 bosses, and find the 8 mirror shards. This is why the game has 4-player co-op, because this way you can get more than one thing done at once across this game's admittedly pretty sprawling world. Now, I'll go over some of the problems this structure has for a game like Kirby as we go through. The important thing to note is that, like all my other Metroid LPs at this point, I am going for 100% in this game, and what this game counts as 100% is getting every single chest, as well as entering every single room. So there will be times throughout this LP you see me just enter a room and immediately leave. That's just so I can mark it on the map and know I'm done. In every single area, there are 1 to 2 switches you can press. These open shortcuts back to the main hub, and every single switch room also has 2 power-ups for you to choose from that are either good for something coming up, or are just an option if you want to grab it instead of whatever you actually have. Now, the start of the game is still relatively straightforward. I don't think you can actually access the game's more non-linear structure until you've beaten the first boss at least. But this is one of those games that can very quickly get out of hand. Especially because, you may have seen it on the map a moment ago, this game has a absolute love of one-way passageways, denoted on the map by 2 rooms being connected by a line with some dashes going through. It kind of looks like arrows. Because of that, this is a game you can very easily find yourself circling around in, and admittedly getting the level design memorized in. I'm not the biggest fan of that, but I'll go more through that as we go through. Now, one thing I should note, like most of my LPs, this is recorded in segments, but in particular, I am following a speedrun route. My friend Kenny, Musical, is already known as a speedrunner for this game alongside Nightmare and Dreamland, same with my other buddies like Sniper, and more so acquaintances with Rocks and all that. But I'm in particular following, I think, one of Swordsman Kirby's old runs from 2019, I think, for 100%. So if the route looks familiar, that's why. Whenever the music cuts out in a room like this, you're right before a boss fight. And in this case, it's King Golem. It's Whispy Woods by another name, though. He stays entirely to the right, makes boulders fall down that you can inhale and shoot into him. Do damage, he eventually dies. It's the usual Kirby first boss. I don't know why I'm going all Boston on you. Oh, I know he has one new attack. You can summon actual Golem enemies, which you can inhale for either the stone ability, or I think in one case, the wheel power-up. Once you beat a boss, you get the mirror shard, you're good. By and large, enough exploration is all you're going to need to get through the game. By the way, this is what I meant by you need to beat the first boss, because that door doesn't spawn otherwise. But I will say, this definitely can be a game that's very easy to get lost in, because due to how Kirby level design works in general, I feel a lot of rooms are very samey feeling and looking. Especially in the underwater area, more on that in a little bit. But because I'm following a speedrun, I should also note that I'm not going through the bosses in numerical order, like King Golem is the boss of Area 2, so you think I'd do Area 3 next. No, we're kind of going all over the place based off that Swordsman Kirby run. Now, back at the very start of the game, I did a mix for the wheel ability. What mixes are is if you inhale 2 enemies of any type that are at least, I think, different power-ups, you get entered into a roulette wheel. And from there, a bunch of, I think basically every building in the game is available, and depending on when you press A, whatever it lands on is what you get. But you can manipulate mixes to an extent. You see, the way it works in, I think, Nightmare and Dreamland and Amazing Mirror, don't exactly quote me on that, Sniper, I'm looking at you in particular if you're watching this for some reason, is essentially every enemy essentially has a numerical value attached to them. So say like a Waddle Dee is a 1 and a Sparky is a 3. Those will be added together, and that number that you get from that is your starting point on the roulette for the mix. So for instance, whatever ability in that case, obviously not the exact math, but is mapped to the 4th slot is where you're going to start. And from there you can get really consistent with mixing because you'll have always a good setup as well as the exact same abilities in the exact same order. It just comes down to learning how quickly you can press A on, I think, a 2 to 3 frame window. I don't think it's a 1 frame, I think it's 2. It's precise, but it can be worth it. And hell, in some cases, there's even auto mixes where you just let the roulette run out and boom, you got whatever ability you want. Normally it's wheel because wheel is the fastest method of movement in the game. But sometimes you might want something like UFO or fire. Obviously, this is mostly a casual run. I'm not a speedrunner in this game myself. But hey, if you're really good at pattern recognition, you might be able to recognize where you start on the roulette wheel with certain mixtures and just get really consistent at it. Not that the game has every enemy in every room, of course, so there's some mixes you can only do in very specific situations. Also, welcome to Area 6, Olive Ocean. It's the water level for the game. And on that note, I should note, I mentioned there's a lot of samey-looking rooms in the game, and there are. But generally speaking, every area has like 1 to 2 different visual variations in it, so you can get a good idea where you are after a while. Like, okay, I'm in like this half of Olive Ocean and things like that. But there's something about how this game is very open realm, like very open world in a way, almost. Because there's almost no restrictions on where you can go after the first boss fight. You can go all the way to Area 9 and fight what's supposed to be the final boss before the final boss. You can go to Area 6. You can do anything. And that's where one of my structural issues comes into play with the game, admittedly. Outside of defeating a certain number of boss fights, I feel this game's sense of progression is kind of non-existent. Like, you'll get items. You will increase your health as you progress through certain particular items. But you'll never actively get stronger, so to speak. Compare this to, say, like, any given Metroid or non-linear Castlevania game where you have upgrade items that will increase your strength, new weapons, or mobility upgrades. Amazing Mirror plays it relatively straight. And it's interesting to me in that regard because it's a very different take, but I feel the game also kind of suffers for it because it almost feels like it's overwhelming in a way. Also, the map looked a little bit different there, you may have noticed. You can access the map screen even if you don't have the map for an area. You just won't be able to see exactly how what rooms connect to what way. And I should note that this is a goal game. At the end of certain dead-end pathways, you'll find one of these. It's essentially a bonus minigame to get some extra lives, like restore your health, get some batteries if you need it for your cell phone. Because the cell phone only has 3 battery units, and those can be used any way. You can use it to return to the main base, you can call on your allies, anything like that, but you only have 3 at a time. But batteries are located all over the goddamn place, so it's very easy to recharge. And one thing that the game does to try and help you figure out which ways you've been and haven't been, outside of making your own map or memorization, of course, and that is, you might notice on the doors throughout the game, they have a little bit of a blue rim around the star sometimes. That shows that you haven't been through that door in that direction. So say it's a 2-way door, me going through this one, it's on that door behind me, but I don't need to go back through it, but if I go back into that room, it won't be on either door now. And because of that, I should note, you can tell sometimes where my segments begin and end for recording this, because I'll go through a door that has a blue rim and the other side of it won't have it. Located randomly throughout the world are mini-bosses. Oh, not randomly, they're completely set, but they seemingly feel like they're placed randomly. They are either a way to get rarer abilities, in fact they're the only way to get like 2 or 3 of them, outside of course, a mix. And usually they're, I'd say, the more useful abilities for combat, like we got Fighter here, which you play like a Street Fighter character and all that. By and large, for playing through the game though, it's not really needed. You can make do with just Kirby standalone, and you'll be fine outside of the boss fights. Also, I died. It's very easy to die in this game, but thankfully there's lives all over the place, and the game saves, so a game over is just an inconvenience at most. If this game was made today, they probably wouldn't have lives, period. You'd just be... Actually, you'd probably be back to your save point if it was closer to a real Metroid game. Whenever I die, I'm usually just gonna continue at the start of the room, not make a jump cut, because the rooms in this game are so relatively small. But if it's a long enough trek, I will be jump cutting. Also, whenever you find a second switch first along a pathway, make sure you go back to the door so you can find the first switch. Now, one thing I should note, the way I'm playing this game, because I'm following a speed run, thanks Swordsman Kirby again, don't do this your first time through the game. I feel games like this are best enjoyed just by exploring, but it's very much a game that I can see a lot of people nowadays getting frustrated in just wandering randomly until they find something. but more on that again as we progress. Also, sometimes the game does something really interesting to me in that it has more than one enemy type for an ability. Like, we'll have bigger enemies who aren't quite mini-bosses who have the same ability as a smaller variant of that enemy. And it's unusual, to say the least. Also, that's what I meant earlier when I said that sometimes I'll just enter a room, kind of pause, be like, that's nice, and go back through. Because that room, I'm either going to go through another door to it anyway later on, or I never need to be in there again. Now, one thing I should note, the reason I ended up following a speed run for the game, just so I could have a solid route that's efficient compared to my usual Metroid escapades where I know the game relatively well enough. The reason I did that is because of just that. I don't know the game that well, which is odd because I have been playing this game for years. This was a relatively late pickup on my Game Boy Advance for me, but I've been playing it a lot of my life. It's just I haven't played this compared to every other Metroid game on the system, so to speak, as much, because I play Zero Mission and Fusion a lot, but games like this, not as much. Which is odd to me, because I remember exactly where I picked the game up, but I'll talk more about that next part, just as an off story. Now, a moment ago, you may have seen a very interesting looking enemy that looked like a door. That is, I believe, called a Mira? It is a door, but you have to sneak up on it and attack it in order to damage it. You can't dash next to it, you can't jump and land, otherwise it'll flee. The best way to probably do this is either to use a long-distance weapon like a laser or beam, or to admittedly use an air puff when you're just floating Kirby. Usually those doors are pretty key to finding certain boss fights or certain areas that have rarer items. But we'll get more through that as we go. And I should note, there are worthwhile item pickups in the game. A lot of the chests in the game will have like batteries, health pickups, or extra lives in them, but there are some that have unique key items that you can use in the game's main menu for various things. We'll talk more about them as we see them. And because this is 100%, we are getting them all. Usually the more important items are designated by a larger chest, but not always, because sometimes the unique items are in a small chest because either it just would look weird having a big chest there for no reason, or there is no or. Sometimes they just didn't put them in big chests for some reason. Either way, with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we're going to be entering, I hesitate to say the next area, but another area, Carrot Castle, and seeing what awaits for us in there. See you guys then!